I just called it because I want to exercise this whole Brian Kelly's a good coach thing.
Okay.
We got to go through this, Mark, because you said this for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And what now? Just maybe why do you feel Brian Kelly is a good coach?
Okay. Brian Kelly went to a MAC school. We'll place that aside. So his first decent sized coaching gig was at Cincinnati, and he succeeded with flying colors. The last team he took to the Sugar Bowl. Okay. Then he left for Notre Dame, and he elevated Notre Dame to its greatest height since Lou Holtz back in the early 90s. So he was able to elevate Notre Dame. And now he's moved on to LSU, and we will, the case is wide open there, but good early indications at LSU.
Okay.
Like, where would you rank Brian Kelly? I would rank him as a top 10 coach. I have ranked him as the top 10 coach in the country.
What I like about Brian Kelly is he's consistently wins the games he's supposed to win.
Yeah, he does.
You know what I mean? Like, he's just that guy.
Yeah.
You know, Brian Kelly, he's going to show up, and with the exception of a couple really bad years, that he's had. He shows up, he wins the games that he's supposed to win.
Yes.
That's who he is. That's a good coach to me. He's a good coach, but that doesn't put him up in some higher level.
That's what I called him, a good coach.
Well, I mean, good coach is like there's dozens of good coaches.
Most of them are good coaches,
right? Okay, so then maybe I misunderstood you. So you're not putting him like elite top 10 kind of coach.
No, I said he's a top 10 coach.
Oh, that's more than good, right? I mean, that's pretty elite. If you're like 10 out of 130, that means you're pretty up there.
Well, you can almost eliminate 70 or 80 just because they haven't proven they're either never going to elevate past a group of 5 level, or they have yet to prove. They're somewhere out there lurking right now at Western Kentucky or Georgia Southern is the next great coach. Then we'll find that out 3 to 5 years from now. But otherwise, those guys will never elevate to his level by any stretch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's my thing about when he was at Notre Dame.
Yep.
What do you his record against top 5 opponents
bad.
were? Huh?
It's bad.
Yeah, 0-4.
Awful.
But the weird thing about 0-4 is in 10 years.
Yep.
That's the weird number. In 10 years, he played 4 top 5 teams. In 10 years.
And we're counting postseason.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think a couple of our postseason.
He played over his entire career at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm looking at this article.
So obviously they played Alabama in the playoff in 2020. They played Notre Dame in the playoff in 2018. Not Notre Dame, Clemson in 2018 in the playoff. So there's 2 right there. Mm-hmm. You could tack this one on, even though they technically were not in the top 5. They lost to Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, and then Ohio State finished number 3 in the country. They were like 6. And then that other game would have been the BCS championship game, which they got annihilated by Alabama in 2012.
Well, I mean, that's just it. He's 0 for New York 6. So when you say New York 6 and Brian Kelly, you just put an L next to that because the guy has never won.
He's 0-4.
And so that's bad.
Who else is winning those games, though? There's only like 3 schools winning those games.
From 2010 through 21 when he left. I mean, that's a long time to be there and win. No, I mean there's plenty of teams that are winning those bowl games. Like even Clay Helton won a New York 6 bowl.
Absolutely, he did.
Yeah,
but think of this, Tim. Going into last year's playoff, basically this is the summary of the playoffs since the first year. The SEC beats everyone, and the only 2 teams that beat the SEC were Clemson and Ohio State. I've just summarized the playoff completely. Those are the only 3 components that win any playoff games are the SEC, Clemson, and Ohio State. That's it.
Those are want a playoff game?
Yes.
Oregon won.
Oregon. I said from the first year going, yes. I eliminated the end years, but yes, Oregon won a playoff game. TCU won a playoff game. But basically, in terms of anything that matters, those are the three. Those are the three components that have won anything that matters, because the other two got blitzed in the championship game. So those are the three that have won anything of consequence. The SEC, Clemson, Ohio State.
I didn't say
nobody else is doing anything.
I got you. But Mark, I didn't say playoff games. I said New York 6 bowls. That's not just the playoff games.
He only played in one.
That's my point again. We're trying to say he's this great coach, and he hasn't won New York 6 bowls. He's so let's look at this. He's 4 and so before LSU, he was 4-13 against top 10 teams.
Yes. What did he inherit?
That's abysmal.
What did he inherit?
He was there 11 years.
I understand, but what did he inherit? We have to look at, we can't just look at one. You're taking one slice of it. I'm taking another slice, which is there's a difference in inheriting Lincoln Riley from Bob Stoops at Oklahoma or Ryan Day from Urban Meyer at Ohio State versus what Brian Kelly inherited. Those are,
well, there's leaps. Would you say that what Lincoln Riley got at Oklahoma was the same as what Ryan Day got at Ohio State?
No.
Okay.
But it's closer. It's closer than what Brian Kelly, he got a 6 or 7 win football team. That's what they were doing. They racked up a bunch of 7-6 seasons.
Mm-hmm. They had a couple of bad coaches, but remember also this is Notre Dame where they do win. Again, that's one of the schools. If you have a decent coach, they're going to win a lot of games. And he was there, and they won a lot of games. But the sticking point to me is look at all those games they won under Brian Kelly. They played 4 top 5 teams in all of that whole stretch. All those empty wins he had. He
can't control that.
Nobody can control getting a team that when he does get against a top 10 team, that he goes better than 4-13 against them. Right?
I'd like to know where Clemson was ranked in 2020. He won that game.
He beat Alabama last year, but then again, he turns around and loses at Texas A&M.
And he went to the SEC
which coach is
game.
Huh?
He got his team to the SEC championship game.
He beat Alabama, but he lost to Georgia. He lost to
he beat other teams too.
He got destroyed by games. He got destroyed by Tennessee.
Yes.
He lost to Texas A&M. What were they 5? They didn't even go to a bowl last year, did they?
No. I don't know of anyone who expected LSU to play in the SEC championship game last year.
Well, I don't think most people thought that Alabama would have the issues they had last year.
They were still one of the top 5 teams.
They were very good, exactly, but they found ways to lose the games they usually win. They lost by 1 point too. They beat LSU, beat it by 1 point. My point is, I'm not even talking about that. I'm trying to get through to my point is that I keep hearing from you that he's a top 10 coach, but I don't know many top 10 coaches that I know that are 4 and we'll say, well, hold on. So then last year he would have been what 1-2 or 1-3 because they lost to Florida State, right? Were they a top 10 team?
Well, it depends on if you're talking about at the time of the kickoff or at the conclusion of the game of the season.
Well, usually they do it at the time of the game, don't they?
Well, at the time of the game, Florida State was not ranked. That was the first game of the year. They beat Alabama, so notch that next to him. They were certainly ranked in the top 5 of the country.
Alabama, yeah, they were.
Yeah. So, okay. And they lost to Georgia.
So let's say it's 2. So they went 1 and 2. So let's make it 6 and 15. Do elite coaches go 6 and 15 against top 10 teams?
Depends who they're coaching. Huh? Depends what teams they're coaching.
Okay, Notre Dame and LSU. So you're a head coach at Notre Dame and LSU, and you go 6 and 15 against top 10 teams. Is that elite?
Okay, you're spitting out numbers, which is something I do on a regular basis, but you also would have to name for me the coaches that are better than Brian Kelly. And then you would have to allow me the ability and opportunity to tell you why they're not.
So the fact that so
you say he's not in the top 10.
Just so I understand, it's irrelevant that at LSU and mainly at Notre Dame,
yes,
and LSU that he's gone. What is it? 5 and 15.
Yes,
against top 10 teams. That's irrelevant.
I didn't say it was irrelevant.
Okay. Well, why is he then?
I said that while you're telling me that he's not a top 10 coach, you need to bring to me the litany of coaches that are better than him, because and don't rank him number 11 to prove your point. He must be like 20 or 25 at least, if not worse, for you to be making this phone call and this point. So I don't know 25 coaches out there that are better than Brian Kelly.
Yeah. 25. There's at least, I would say, there's at least 20 coaches better than him. I don't say name them off.
All right.
I'm literally looking. You are what your records says you are. You really are.
Yeah, and he also had to win the other games.
Yeah, but those are cream puffs. Those are cream puffs.
Not just because they're ranked in the top 5 in the country does it mean that they're cream puffs.
No, top 10. Top 10. Again, the top 5 is such a small sample.
I don't care about the rankings at the time of kickoff. I would have to go through the games themselves. You know, he lost a game against Georgia in 2017 when they eventually went on to come this close to winning a national championship. They lost by 1 point. You don't think he had his team prepared?
I'm not saying Brian Kelly hasn't had some good teams. And I'm not saying that Brian Kelly hasn't won some games. I'm just really not connecting the dots when I see that record against quality. I call a top 10 team a quality opponent. A top 10 team is a quality opponent. And it would be different if he was 500 or close to 500. But he's not. He's out of 20 games, he's won 5 of the 20 games against quality opponents.
I get it. I understand. I knew that before you called.
Okay.
But I'm not hearing the 20 or 25 coaches that are better than Brian Kelly. I can't find 25 coaches or 20 coaches out there that I would rather have coached my football team than Brian Kelly. I don't know who those guys are. It's not Steve Sarkisian. It's not. No. I don't know that I want James Franklin running my program ahead of
Kyle Whittingham or Brian Kelly.
I would love to pull up my rankings from this past off season. I believe I had Kyle Whittingham like 6th in the country. So yes, I had Kyle Whittingham ranked ahead of Brian Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 in the Pac-12 I would take over Brian Kelly. There's
really?
there's at least 4 or 5 in the
and they've accomplished more than Brian Kelly. You're talking about accomplishments, and you're going to tell me that they've accomplished more than Brian Kelly. Of course, you're saying Lincoln Riley, Kyle Whittingham.
That's a given.
I guess it's a given.
They're not in the same conversation. Those two.
You talk about losing a lot of big games in blowout fashion. Lincoln Riley's made a career out of that.
Really? How many blowouts is the biggest Lincoln Riley?
Well, anytime they play anyone on a national stage, for the most part.
What about going to the shoe?
They haven't looked great.
What about 2017 against Urban Meyer, going into the shoe and blowing them out?
I don't know if they blew them out. They were trailing in the 4th quarter. I don't consider that a blowout, but they won the game.
Score?
The final score was 31-16. If you watched the game, you knew it wasn't a blowout. But yeah, they won the game
by multiple touchdowns. Yeah,
yeah.
Against number 2 Ohio State in the shoe.
Yeah.
I mean, he has some pretty good wins. He has a Cotton Bowl win.
Again, the point was about him being a top 10 coach, and I'm not hearing 20 coaches that are better than him. So when I say a coach is a top 10 coach, if you laid out your list of coaches and he was number 12, then that to me doesn't prove the point. 10, 12, 8. The last time I ranked coaches this past offseason, I clearly stated between like 7 and 15 was like that close.
If you're an AD, isn't part of your criteria is your ability to actually beat the elite teams, not just win the games you're supposed to win. So we started a conversation because you'll have no argument from me.
There's very few people doing this. Who else is doing this? Like 4 coaches. Jim Harbaugh wasn't doing it until Jim Harbaugh still, aside from Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh had a similar record to what you just outlined Brian Kelly having against top 5 and 10 teams. So what are we saying about Jim Harbaugh now? That he's a great coach.
I mean, if you go a great coach over like 1 or 2 seasons, you know, Jim Harbaugh goes like this. He's like he was up at Stanford, did great at San Diego, and worked his way up, and then went to the pros and came back and struggled mightily in Michigan. What Jim does really well is he does that power football game against teams that have elite fast defenses, and he just runs it down their throat. That's what he did. He's like a big George Foreman. He wears you down and just pounds you and pounds you and pounds you. And then finally pulls away at the end. That's how he's beaten Ohio State. So I mean,
the point
do you think Jim Harbaugh's a great coach?
The point I was making is that if you look at Jim Harbaugh's record against top 10 teams and James Franklin's record against top 10 teams,
James Franklin's terrible.
They're pretty similar to, but James Franklin still, again, what you're not doing, Tim, is showing me who's better than these coaches, because James Franklin, I'm not going to sell anyone that James Franklin has achieved in big games either, because he hasn't, but there's really not that many coaches better than him. I get top 15 coach.
No, he's in that middling section. And what I'm saying is I think he gets a lot of hype. This is my only point. And the numbers speak for themselves. And to say that, well, nobody's win those games. His numbers are abysmal against top 5. And I'll say it again. How many coaches have won a New York 6 bowl? A lot. A fair amount.
That's not the end all be all winning a New Year's 6 bowl.
Here's why.
Especially when you've only coached in 4 of them. And
that's a problem.
2 of them were against Alabama teams that were, there was no question, the best team in the country. They were obliterating everyone.
Well, you should.
So that was 2 of them.
If you're a top 10 coach, you should be going to more than 4 games like that.
The other one was against a Trevor Lawrence team that was undefeated and won the national championship. They obliterated everyone, including Alabama, by 4 touchdowns. And the other one was an Ohio State team that was an NFL team that was coming off a national championship.
Well, you said that Lincoln Riley was obliterated a bunch of times, but the only one I can think of is that LSU team that obliterated him with Orgeron.
Alabama the year before.
How much did they win by?
That was a blowout. It was 28-0 like that. That game was never in doubt. Over. Just because they scored a lot of pretty points at the end of the game. That was not.
I see a bias. I'll call bias. You can call bias on my point. I think you definitely have a bias.
No, so, I don't have what bias do I have? I could care less about Brian Kelly. I could care less about LSU, Notre Dame. What bias do I have? I just pointed out to you that a game that ended up 38-27, I believe was the final, 45-34, 11-point game, was never a game. It was 28
in the first quarter, it was a bunch of turnovers, right? It was like the beginning of the game, there was a bunch of turnovers.
Regardless of what it was 28-0 Alabama, and Lincoln Riley got obliterated in that game. The game was not close.
Yeah, there were 2 or 3 turnovers early in the game, and they called themselves back. Who cares, Mark?
That's not an excuse. You're making an excuse for Lincoln. He got blown out in that game. It wasn't a close game.
We're just going to watch the next. We're just going to watch the next couple of years.
A close game.
We'll just watch the next couple of years. You absolutely have a bias against Lincoln Riley. Absolutely.
I don't have a bias against Lincoln Riley.
You literally had him out of your top 10 last year.
Yeah. And you said you had
done nothing.
The difference between like 6 and 14 was nothing.
And you have Brian Kelly in your top 10, a guy that's 4 and
I don't know
what against top 10 teams.
You understand the rankings are fluid. Like you understand that what happened last year would have counted in the rankings for this offseason that I have yet to do.
What Brian Kelly did over his 15, 16 year, if you don't go back to his Division II years or whatever, over the years, I'm not counting his national championships back then. I'm talking about his career in big boy football has been the biggest empty calories career you've ever seen in your life. He beat the teams he's supposed to beat, racked up good records, never played championship games, got embarrassed in bowl games.
Well, they can't play in championship games not playing in a conference. So you're not going to play in championship games.
Correct. So the only thing they could play in were these bowl games, and they got exposed in the bowl games.
Yeah.
So I just don't think beating up on Purdue and Helton SC teams and just all the stuff that he's done in his career, none of it amounts to anything to say, hey, this guy's a really good coach.
Well, Lincoln Riley went 0-3 and
against the 3 national champions.
Well, now he's 0-4. He's matching Brian Kelly in the exact same number that you just gave me. Lincoln Riley has the same exact record as Brian Kelly.
You got giddy there, Mark, but that was his first year after a 4-8 season. And he, the funny thing, that's why I love when people rip on that game, because USC should not even.
I just outlined why Brian Kelly lifted Notre Dame from a 7-win program to what he did.
USC should not even been in that game.
You're the one who's biased.
Period. Well, if you want to talk about also coaching,
you biased for Lincoln Riley.
You think coaching lost that game?
I could care less about Lincoln Riley.
Like, you sure?
Obviously, there's you know that you're biased toward USC, just like I'm biased toward Ohio State. I admit it. I try to filter that out. I do my very best, but you're biased toward Lincoln Riley, and that's fine. You're a USC guy. I could care less about Lincoln Riley.
I think you'd have to have an anti-USC bias to say that what Lincoln Riley did last year was short of a freaking miracle. Because one of the things you had against Lincoln Riley when you said he was out of the top 10 was that he was handed the keys to, and I would argue that because Oklahoma was struggling before he became offensive coordinator. They had a pretty bad season the year before he became
him as an offensive coordinator.
Well, and then he became the head coach, and then they won at least 10 games a year, and he was going, you're right, and they were losing to the national champions. They lost to a really good Alabama team. They lost to a really good Georgia team.
I just cited Brian Kelly's New Year's 6 record is basically what Lincoln Riley's is. They're almost exact.
You want to know the difference?
Except what the difference is, he didn't lose to Tulane.
You want to know what the difference is? The difference is Brian Kelly's been around 15 years. Lincoln Riley's been around 6, and he's already been to that many games.
Lincoln Riley was handed a much better program at Oklahoma than Brian Kelly was handed at Notre Dame.
Say again?
Brian Kelly was not handed the same program at Notre Dame that Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma.
He got the 4 New Year's 6 games in all those years at Notre Dame, and Lincoln Riley in 1 year took a 4-8 USC team and took him to a New Year's 6. And quite frankly, let's be real, if Caleb Williams doesn't pull his hamstring, they would end up being 17. They went up 21-3. Talk about your blowouts early in that championship game, but he blows out his Achilles in the third drive of the game, and they lose that. Otherwise, they're in the playoffs in year 1 after a 4-8 season.
Well, they didn't make the playoffs, and we don't know what would have happened.
Okay, we don't. And then to blame you're making a point about the Cotton Bowl against Tulane. That wasn't coaching. The guy fumbled the ball on a kickoff. It was fluke. This is about as fluky as you can get. Tell me how that was coaching or Lincoln Riley.
I didn't say that it was. We were matching postseason records, and you were taking all that time to highlight Brian Kelly's 0-4 record, which exactly matches Lincoln Riley's.
We'll look at Lincoln Riley's
Brian
record.
Kelly has had to face tougher competition in those 4 games.
Really?
Yes.
So what was it? Let's go through people. Lincoln Riley.
Tulane.
Let's look at the Lincoln Riley teams that he lost to. So he lost to Alabama. Did they win the national championship? Yes.
No, they lost by 4 touchdowns in the national championship.
Oh, to Clemson.
Brian Kelly lost to that Clemson team that beat Alabama by 4 touchdowns.
Okay, and then they lost to LSU.
They won the national championship. Yep.
And they lost a Georgia team that lost in the national championship game.
Yep.
By 2 points in overtime, right?
Yeah.
Something like that, or?
Yeah, and they lost to Tulane. Brian Kelly,
yeah,
as I outlined a few minutes ago, Brian Kelly lost to 2 Alabama teams that were the national champion.
So Brian Kelly lost
Without
to
question.
the 2011 Champs Sports Bowl.
Okay.
To
You just changed the conversation.
What are we doing? We're talking about postseason bowl games, right?
Well, no, we weren't. We were talking about New Year's Six, and we were talking about playoff and championship games. But now you've changed it because I think I checked that one off in Brian Kelly's favor. But go ahead.
Again, Brian. So how long has Lincoln Riley been a coach?
Since 2017.
So that's what, 6 years? 17. Yeah. So 6 years.
Yeah.
And in 6 years, he's gone to how many New York Sixes?
He was doing what Bob Stoops was doing.
No. I'm not talking about Bob Stoops. I'm talking about his career.
Yeah. How many took over a better program than Brian Kelly did.
Bob Stoops went to.
That has something to do with it.
He was part of that. He was part of the resurgence at Oklahoma. And they were chugging wind before he got there.
By the way, if you want to make an analogy, Lincoln Riley basically did last season, which I gave him all the credit in the world. I don't understand the perception that I have anything against Lincoln Riley. I could care less about it. Again, I just evaluate him impartially. I don't care about Lincoln Riley one way or the other. Just like I evaluate everybody else. Mel Tucker took over a 2-win Michigan State team and won the Peach Bowl and won a New Year's Six game and went 11-2 and finished in the top 10. Okay.
We're literally comparing Brian Kelly to Lincoln Riley. Is that what we're doing now?
No, I was just giving you an example of a coach who took over an awful football team and then won a New Year's Six game the next year. It's happened. Other guys have done it. Sonny Dykes just did it.
Mm-hmm. But Lincoln Riley's won everywhere he's been.
Okay. And so is Brian Kelly.
And he doesn't need. Lincoln Riley's never won 4 games in a year like Brian Kelly did.
Brian Kelly has won everywhere he's been as well.
All right. Well, I'll stand by the fact that you think that we'll just remember this going forward, that you feel that Brian Kelly's a better coach than Lincoln Riley.
No. We are having a discussion about what's going on right this second.
They were Stoops wasn't really Stoops the year before Riley got there. They went 8-5. They were 8-5
before he got there as an offensive coordinator.
Yes,
the year before they won the Big 12 and they finished in the top 10 in the country.
Mark, did they win with defense in those years? Do you know how bad their defense was in those years? They won because Riley outscored everybody.
I'm not debating Lincoln Riley as an offensive coordinator. Build a defense, Lincoln Riley. Do that. Can you finally field a defense
in 5 years
is worth anything? Can you do that?
Yeah, he did this year.
I know Brian Kelly has fielded better defenses than Lincoln Riley.
And Brian Kelly has coached for 20 years, Mark. I mean, I think you're forgetting that point. This guy's only been a coach 6 years. He's 40 years old, for God's sake. Yeah, been coaching a long time, filling up on lots of empty wins. And I can't believe you're defending some guy that's 5-15 against the top 10.
I'm not defending him.
Sounds like it.
I'm getting attacked for saying he's a good coach.
And
you never answered the question that there's got to be like 20 or 25 guys better than, and even if you give me the 25th best coach in college football, I still think he's a good coach.
He's not a top 10 coach. No way. Not with a record like that.
Well, where is he?
You can't justify a guy.
You've never answered my question of where he should be ranked.
Probably somewhere between 15 and 20-ish.
Okay.
By the way, that's just truly based on the, like, I give him a lot of credit for Cincinnati. You know the Peter principle, right? Where you kind of rise to your level.
Sure. Yeah.
That's Brian Kelly. That's Brian Kelly. What he did. Oh my gosh, my mom's alma mater in Michigan. I can't remember it now. Grand Valley State. What he did at Grand Valley State, phenomenal. Amazing. Cincinnati, again, amazing. What he did at Notre Dame, not amazing.
I didn't say it was amazing.
Not even great.
No.
He won all the games he was supposed to win and then lost all the meaningful games.
And Lincoln Riley had an excellent run at Oklahoma. You know, if we could take all the comments I've ever made about Lincoln Riley, I don't know what you're talking about, because if we could take all the comments I've ever made about Lincoln Riley, I've given him credit for all that he's done. But he's not perfect, and he has not delivered all the time.
So he had Mike
and
Stoops.
He's got the same postseason record in big postseason games as Brian Kelly.
I think what you're missing is in about maybe a third of the time that he's been a coach as Brian Kelly, he's been in the same amount of New York Six games. And Brian Kelly does have a Cotton Bowl win. And really, if that poor kid had caught, I'm not going to say his name, had caught the ball at the 2-yard line, Lincoln Riley had 2 Cotton Bowl victories. So to put that on a coach, you fine. We can say, well, he lost. That's the way it is. But I'm truly shocked that you're comparing the 2 coaches, because they are literally not on the same plane. Lincoln Riley has won like 86% of his games as a coach, 85% of the games as a coach. Regardless of what he was given, we've seen guys at Oklahoma, for instance, or at Oregon, who were handed a really good program, and then it just dies. What he did is he raised it back up. Stoops was doing really good, but he dipped down. It wasn't the early Stoops. I mean, Stoops only won 1 national championship in the very beginning of his career. And they won games, but they also lost. If you remember, the joke about that was that Stoops couldn't win the big game, right? People always say he couldn't win the big game. He got hammered in BCS games. Maybe it's an Oklahoma thing. Who knows? Maybe he can't win big games in Oklahoma. I remember a lot of BCS games that Oklahoma probably shouldn't even been in. And he wasn't winning them. But Lincoln Riley did bring that program back up. And he did just bring up USC back up. And I think all these people hand-wringing about how bad our defense are in for a big surprise this year. And I can't wait. I'm not going to talk now. Let everyone do the talking how bad Lincoln Riley doesn't care about defense and doesn't have a defense. I'll let that sit for a while. And then we can see.
What he's
we'll all
showing
talk
us
at the year. You guys told me that Lincoln Riley can't have a good defense.
Brian Kelly elevated Notre Dame football further than Lincoln Riley did Oklahoma football.
One more time?
Not debatable.
What's that?
That Brian Kelly elevated Notre Dame football further than Lincoln Riley elevated Oklahoma football. That's not debatable.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
That if you take over a program that's winning like 55% of its games and you lift it to the level that he did, you've done more than lifting a program that's already going to playoffs and major bowl games, and you basically just do the same thing.
That means nothing.
Sure it does.
How does that mean something?
We're just talking in circles.
No, but my point to you is you're saying what was
I've made this point about
Lincoln Riley gets
times.
penalized. Lincoln Riley gets penalized because he took over a program that was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. Again, the reason why you want to talk about, you keep saying that Stoops was the coach, but realize this: the defense was trash. They got rid of Heupel because he didn't work. And they went 8-5, and they bring in Lincoln Riley in his offense, and we saw he won Heisman trophies with that offense.
I'm still trying to hear of the 20 or 25 coaches that are better than Brian Kelly.
No, I'm not. That's not the point. The point is
for that.
The point is the guy's record. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for you to justify how you put a guy in the top 10 who literally is 5-15 against top 10 teams.
Aren't 10 or 12 coaches better than him. That's why. That's how I've done it.
Yeah, we'll disagree. We'll see how Brian Kelly does the next couple of years. We'll see Lincoln Riley.
And that
it's fruitless to argue it right now.
And that will
you're setting your decision.
And that will be completely inconsequential to what we just talked about, because then I'll rank them. It's a fluid situation. It is a fluid situation.
He was an annual disappointment at Notre Dame. They had some of the best offensive lines I've seen in probably in the past 20 years. They
Certainly
had a
in
couple.
2012, they were not a disappointment when they went to a BCS championship game when nobody in the world.
What was the score of that championship game?
They got blown out. They went to a BCS championship game when they weren't even ranked.
They weren't good enough. Clearly, were they the second best team?
I understand they weren't good enough. You're speaking obvious claims to me.
No.
You don't think I know that Notre Dame wasn't good enough to play Alabama?
Saying, Mark.
Nobody else in the country was good enough.
You're not hearing what I'm saying, Mark.
Georgia.
You're not hearing what I'm saying. There were other teams that were more deserving to be in that game. They got gifted. Right. So why is that an achievement? They got gifted in there.
That was not an achievement.
Not an achievement.
Taking over Notre Dame when they're going 7-6 and lifting them to a BCS championship.
You make it sound like Notre Dame is like, no offense out there, Purdue. Notre Dame is like Notre Dame. You should be able to do that.
You are taking basically the worst coach to defend in Lincoln Riley and saying that it's national championship or bust is basically what you're saying. And otherwise, you've done nothing.
I'm saying that I'm the worst. I'm sorry. I'm taking the worst coach to defend Lincoln Riley
in that way, in that manner, in that context. Yes.
No bias, huh, Mark?
Because if the national championship is the standard, then Lincoln Riley has continued to fail in doing so.
How many coaches won a national championship since Riley's been a coach? How many coaches have won a national championship since he's been a coach?
If we would rewind this conversation 30 minutes, you're basically taking my bullet points and using them.
6 years.
I was making these exact points like 30 minutes ago when I was telling you that nobody is winning in this sport in playoff and championship levels except for
you're banging your point, not mine. I'm saying to you, how long has he been a coach? How long has Kelly been a coach, a football coach? 30 years?
At Notre Dame, it's
30. No. How many years has he been a head coach?
A long, long time.
A really long time.
Yes.
And you're comparing that and a record against a guy's been a coach for 6 years. And instead of saying, wow, this guy's been a coach for 6 years and he's been to the playoffs how many times? He took a 4-8 team and took them to what? See, that's what I'm saying. And I'm hearing you defend a guy who's been around for 30 years and has an abysmal record against quality opponents.
And you're talking about Lincoln Riley like he's Dabo Sweeney, and he lifted a program from the dust to national championship status.
When did I say that? Now you're putting words in my mouth, Mark. You know that I didn't say that. That's not what I said. Let's look at Lincoln Riley's record against top 10 teams then.
Good to talk to you. We are reviewing stuff that we've reviewed 80 times, and there's 3 people waiting.
Although what's this record then if we reviewed it 80 times?
I don't even know what you said because I've grown tired of this conversation.
So Lincoln Riley is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 3 against top 10 teams.
He's
6-3. He has more top 10. He has more top 10 victories in his 6-year career than Brian Kelly has in 30.
Who have they defeated in those games?
Number 2, Ohio State in the horseshoe, 31-16.
Yep.
They beat Texas 39-27.
Yeah, they were not a top 10 team.
They beat. We're going on
ranking, at the time of the kickoff. Yes, that's why I'm having you read off this list. So we're gonna cross off the Iowa States and the Kansas States
and we're gonna rewrite national championships, and because national championships don't matter because
neither one of them have won a national championship. So that.
Oh no, I'm just saying your criteria usually is what you feel is important, which is fair enough, but it doesn't mean it's real. I mean, how else are you going to do? We're looking at, are you doing the research to look at all these teams and find out where they were at the end of the year and do all that? I mean, that's just a waste. I'm not spending that much time on this.
We've spent a lot of time on it.
I'm just blown away.
We spent way too much time on it.
From now until the end of time,
you forget who you're talking to, and I can tell you where those teams finished.
From now until the end of time, I'm going to hold you. I'm going to hold you to this. That you told me Brian Kelly's a better coach than Lincoln Riley.
I didn't. No.
Yeah, you did.
I told you that I ranked him higher, and I don't even know what the rankings were exactly, like 9 and 12 last season before this next season, in which, of course, I would have elevated Lincoln Riley, and I still have that opportunity to do that because
I'm sure it'll be somewhere around 8 or 9.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
All right, Mark.
Probably in that range. All right, Tim.